Hello and welcome. This is going to be the first in Path of the Empress Step 16, where we're going to focus on a theme of the Tower card, which is another of my favorite cards, mostly because it's one of the most misunderstood cards. And if you can't tell already by following these videos, I very much love to bring understanding and light to the misunderstood. And I'm going to try to keep these videos a little bit shorter and sweeter. Not so much in the sense of trying to keep them overly structured, but it feels like sometimes it's nice to have something a little short and sweet, and sometimes it's nice to have things a little long and deep, right? Also, interestingly enough, on the radio popped up a song called Karma. And often times the Tower card is connected with karma. Now, what I want to talk about actually is learning to allow towers to happen. And first and foremost, it's because when a tower happens, it's because either you've manifested or unknowingly allowed a false foundation to be built, or one has been built around you, because these can come up from the ways that we were raised and the ways that we were conditioned by society. Now, one of my favorite things about the Tower card is actually, if you look at the top of the card, there is a lightning bolt striking the top of the tower, and there is a crown popping off the top of it. And for most readers that understand this card, it's not just about shakeups and big crazy chaos happening, it's about enlightenment, because most often when we go through a tower moment, it's kind of like a phoenix moment, like with the death card, or even with the devil card, to where you end up more aware, more enlightened, and even less burdened when it's done. Now, interestingly enough, a couple of Soul Tribe members and I, and then a few coaching clients later, we ended up working on this interesting thing. This was a difficult one for me at first because of anxious attachment, but it helped me to heal it, is allowing towers to happen. So if you've been codependent or you've been having challenges with releasing control, maybe that's what I'll call this video, learning to release control. But if you've had challenges with that, because, like, say, okay, the more complicated ones for me are things that have to do with my kids, my family, and my DM. Okay, the ones I'm still working on, I'm way better at it, but they're still in there. There's still some cobwebs in there. Is like allowing myself to completely refocus on other things day to day and not communicating with my DM. Part of it also is my ADHD, and I just really enjoy talking with him. And I'm at a place to where I'm not so worried. Like, I in the beginning, I was so worried that, oh my gosh, if I didn't talk to him, he might get mad at me and think that I've abandoned him and never talk to me again, because he gets like that. He's adorably anxious in many ways and has his own attachment traumas and fears of abandonment. And so I was so afraid that if for any reason he should think that I was abandoning him, that would just be the end of all endings. And really what it was a false foundation based on codependency. And now I'm at the point where it's like I can go plenty of time without talking to him, but I just enjoy pestering him at this point. It's just kind of amusing. And I know that he both likes it and is frustrated by it, so it's also kind of an impish game for me at this point in time. But I mean, getting to that point it took a learning to allow towers to fall, learning to trust spirit when it was, when I'm getting messages that are saying, refocus, do something else, leave them in their own mess to deal with it. And a lot of it too was like when my masculine when we separated, we had literally just talked about in counseling our fears about, what if we tried a separation. And one of my biggest fears was that he would end up right back in the situation where I found him, effectively, in with a very toxic karmic that he was placating and being abused by and afraid of, and that he would, well, I don't know, go into older versions of himself, and that would suck, because I hate to see him in that kind of pain. And ironically, he has had a fear based around single me is bad me, as in like that he would be troubled, because when he was with former karmics, I mean, there was various different legal things that got wrapped up and his credit got ruined and all sorts of stuff. And so we co-manifested this situation. I tried to tell him that early on. I felt really bad when I realized that I was just as responsible, or at least equally responsible for manifesting those fears, because fear is one of the strongest emotional energies, and our emotional energies are what fuel our manifestation. So if we're stuck in fear and anxiety, we're manifesting our fears and anxieties. So we both did that together. And that's exactly the situation that he ended up in. and then his fear on the end of being single and not being able to keep himself out of trouble is what is now manifesting, because he has a fear of being alone. And so, like, it's been really healing to have worked throughout the year on learning to allow towers to happen, because now in these moments when he's going through dark night of soul stuff and learning to face those fears and learn the difference between like aloneness and solitude, which he really actually likes solitude, so it'll be really, really good for him as he goes through this. But it cannot happen if my happy-go-lucky attitude is over here like pouring light and love into his life. He needs some alone time, and there are many times that others experience that too, or that you might just get onto a reading that says, you know, leave your masculine alone in their mess. Let them sit in their room in their timeout space and do their thing. Now, it was a lot easier for me to do this when it came to family stuff, largely because of core childhood wounds and things like that, but it was still difficult, because guess where I got that codependence from, that, you know, and the anxious attachment that I brought into my reunion with my twin flame. It was from how I grew up. And actually a good friend of mine, and you know what, she said I could give her a shout out. Her name's Raylene, and I love her, and I hope she sees this video and goes, oh yay me. But she was able to help me see at one point that my fears and my codependence to my masculine was attached to a lot of my core wounding with my father and with my mother, but primarily with my father, especially fears of abandonment. My dad was a big alcoholic for much of the early part of my life, and he's also got a lot of Aries and Aquarius placements, that he's a rather detached individual. And I was adopted, so my parents they adopted me when they were later on in their life already, and so they're from the silent generation as well, which is the children of the adults in the Great Depression. So it was definitely a time when patriarchy taught men that you don't share emotions, you don't do that sort of thing, you know, you don't connect with that. And he also had some challenges in connecting with me because I'm adopted, and like just different things that went on in there. But it brought me some enlightenment. It was a tower moment. It was like, oh, you know what? Somehow I need to figure out how to separate the core wounds that I have from my childhood and my parents from the situation that I have going on with my DM. And if I can figure out how to do that, then I can heal my stuff, my BS that I came in with, and then I can approach and look at the reality of the situation with my DM. And I tell you what, going through and doing that shadow work was one of the best things I could have done. Now, it created a number of other tower moments though, and I will do in some other videos, I will go in and give you some actual exercises that you can do that I've used and help others use that can actually call in healthy tower moments. But first, you got to learn to embrace them. And one of the things that I found most useful is, one, think about the game of Jenga, you know, where you line up the tower of little bricks and blocks, and then you try to pull them out until you get to such this, you know, teeter-tottery thing that it's in there. And what's funny is it's a great metaphor, because oftentimes that's what a tower moment is. We have set up such a precarious situation where often we're trying to avoid looking bad in front of friends or family member, or we don't want to face some conflict, or we've messed up in some way and we're afraid of the consequences of facing that, or saying, yes, I lied, or maybe we'll get rejected if we apologize, things like that. And then when it gets towards the end, like, you're almost kind of just ready for it to fall, but you're also really trying not to let it fall because you want to win the game. And we often kind of treat life like that, and especially with tower moments. I mean, a great example is when we get into karmic relationships, or even relationships with our twin flames, when things have gotten so toxic and so teeter-tottery. We're like, but I've invested so much time and energy, and I don't want to let it fall. But at the same time, you're so tired of trying to find one more block to move out without making it fall. Well, just let it fall down. And this can be, and even for those of you that are with your twins, because I work with some folks that are with their twins, that maybe it's a simple argument, like, or with a family member, or even your children, that you know that you feel really called to bring up an issue that you're positive is going to create conflict. Now, first of all, recognize that if in your mind you believe that the issue is going to bring conflict, it's definitely going to. Now, I don't believe in just, all positivity and blissed outness is going to fix things like that. But you can definitely manifest a better situation if you get your mindset out of thinking the worst and think the best. It might not go as badly as you think it will, and most of the time it doesn't. But instead of trying to figure out the perfect words to say or the perfect way to placate so that there's minimal conflict, instead approach it like, you know what, when a tower moment happens, it's good. If you trigger someone else, you trigger your twin, you trigger your parents, you trigger a friend or anything like that, it's actually good. You're shaking things up, you're creating energy. And much in the same way that earthquakes and forest fires and floods and things like that, yeah, they can be devastating when they happen, but they actually create room for new life. And the way that I like to think about it too is like, let's say that you lived in a house by yourself and it was always clean and there was never anything to clean. There was no kids that came in, there was no friends or family or anything. It just always stayed the same. You'd actually be quite bored. This is actually something I bring up when people talk about wanting equality, because you have to be careful with what you manifest. I know what people mean is equity, but words are important. They are spells. And so when we ask for equality, it kind of reminds me of actually an episode of Fairly Odd Parents where Timmy wished that everybody was equal and the same, and everybody turned into gray blobs, and the whole world was just full of grayness, and everybody was expected to act the same and be the same. And it was boring, and it was also quite totalitarian. It was not a situation that was pleasing. And a lot of times we get into these situations where we try to have like this regimented, it's all got to be this way, or else life will change meaning, and then I'll have a weird cathartic moment and freak out, and I don't know if I'll survive it. Or, I don't know, our minds go to absurd places. I know mine certainly has, and a lot of the folks I work with get there too. And it's quite adorable once you get to the point to where you can allow towers to happen. But the thing is, this human experience is about contrast and complement. It's not about having just one or the other. And without the contrast, without the conflict, without the tower moments, we wouldn't grow. We wouldn't be in there. I mean, even a plant, when when it starts to, first of all, it needs the darkness in order to germinate and even be able to break free from the seed. And then it needs the contrast of the light for it to follow up and come out. And then once it comes out, it needs the wind blowing on it and pushing it around in order for the roots and the branches to get strong for it to keep growing. I mean, if you ever tried it, there's certain plants, especially vegetables, if you grow them in an environment with no wind, they actually grow very, very weak. They need that contrast in order to grow, and so do we. So these tower moments are actually opportunities. If you go to the house metaphor, that like, yeah, you could have it perfect and have no contrast or anything, and it would always be clean. Or you could have the delightfulness of knowing that whenever a mess is made, you get to decide how you want to put it back together. And tower moments are much the same. Yeah, your life might fall apart for a little bit, but there are probably a number of things in your life that I reckon that you probably are ready to be done with. And if you allow tower moments to happen, you actually get the opportunity to get down to the bare bones, the cornerstones, and then go, how do I want to rebuild this? Maybe I want a tower that maybe my next tower, I want it to look like old Mother Hubbard's shoe, and that would be fun. And I don't know that I'd want to be in that forever, but it would be fun to try out for right now, wouldn't it? And get into it. Like, find a more playful way to enjoy the contrast and enjoy the towers. And so what I recommend in this step is sit down and look at what things are you like, especially anything you're desperately trying to hold together or hold on to. And what things are you afraid of? Are you afraid of not talking to your DM? Are you afraid of abandonment? Are you afraid of quitting your job and starting a business? Are you afraid of moving? Like, there's so many things. What things is it that you want to do but you're afraid to do them because you're afraid a tower moment might happen? Or what tower moments do you sense coming anyways that you're kind of procrastinating, facing, or hiding from, or things like that? Sit and write them down, and try to reframe them and think about how else you could look at them that might turn them into something more fun. All right, I'm going to leave this here, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.